Hey, everybody. Welcome to our live stream here. Just checking and making sure we're all good, as always. Welcome to the Cult Leader Playbook. Okay, so I'm going to, bonus live stream today. Excellent. I am doing pretty good. How are you guys doing today? I hope well. It's weather here isn't too bad here in Denver. Actually, we've been getting a lot of rain. And so yesterday and today have been drier. I actually got to get out and get some lawn work done and whatnot. I have a question for you guys, and you can answer or let me know or even email me an answer if you're watching this later. But I've always been curious about something. I will see other people's live streams on lots of different channels, lots of different places, where they will lead up for 5 or 10 minutes. They will start the stream, but not actually get going. And I'm wondering if that's to give people time to show up or arrive, or like, oh yeah, I got my alert, and it takes them 5 minutes to show up or something. Or if there's some other reason people do that. It's not like there's a book or reference material on how to do live streams on YouTube, best practices or something like that. There really isn't. But I've always wondered about that, because it always kind of annoys me if I'm going to some channel and there's a video and I pull it up and the first 10 minutes are just a blank screen. Will be starting shortly or something. I got to skip through that. I've always tried to keep it a policy of when I start a live stream, I want 30 seconds to a minute. I want to be on camera going. Because I thought that was respectful of your time. But this isn't necessarily a real common practice, so I thought I would ask you guys about that. Thank you, Xenu, for your feedback on that. This is definitely, let's go ahead and go over to where we can show the chat. I will actually be walking through a PowerPoint that I put together. The chat will start showing up in a second. For some reason, YouTube and the streaming service I use take a minute to load up the comments and stuff. I'm really not sure why. It always takes a little while. Ads at the beginning. Interesting. Okay, good to know, Sandy, of course. Got to monetize these things. Otherwise, I can't make a living doing it. But definitely good to know that those pop up there. Wow, Budapest. Hey, Mark. Glad you could make it here today. These long waits. Okay. Well, fair enough. Well, I don't know that I'm going to be changing my practices on this, because I like to get going. And so I see we have people showing up here, so let's go ahead and get into it. The whole purpose of today's stream is to talk about the psychology of persuasion and influence. And yes, this has everything to do with cult leaders, manipulators, predators, narcissists, nasty relationship partners, gang leaders, the whole politicians, especially politicians, actually. Really the whole gamut of influence and influence peddling, and how people get you to think the way they want you to, or get you to act the way they want you to, rather than necessarily what is best for you, best for your life and your circumstances. So what I did is last week, I spent the week going through this book. This is called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And then also this book by Margaret Singer called Cults in Our Midst. This is a foundational text on understanding cults and cultic behavior. Margaret Singer was like the OG on this stuff. Robert Lifton did original research on concentration camp, re-education camp survivors coming out of China, and really laid the groundwork for thought reform and the psychology of totalism in the book that he wrote about that. But Margaret Singer is the one who really picked up the torch and ran with it through the 70s and 80s. I believe into the 90s. She was the real flag bearer in pushing back against authoritarian groups, destructive cults, and the whole concept of mind control or thought reform. And how does this stuff work? How do groups How do individuals manipulate us to give up our money, our time, even our families, our social contacts? How does that happen? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. And I just wanted to reference these two books because these are the real basis of a lot of what I'm going to be going over today. I can't recommend reading these things enough. It's really cool, and I love you guys coming and getting my sort of science communicator. I'm a social science communicator. Sort of seminars on this, and I am going to actually be interested in your feedback on it, but the source materials are really important to cite because they're the ones who did the original work on this stuff. So first off, let's go ahead and get into this. I've got a whole little PowerPoint. I did a live presentation here in Denver at the Secular Hub this last weekend using this PowerPoint and stuff. And this is the first time I've tried throwing a PowerPoint up while I'm doing a live stream video. So you're not going to see on screen, you won't see your comments displaying through most of this, but you do have the live chat going while we're going here. Let's get to it. I've actually prepared a whole script for this based on the presentation I gave, and there's the beginning of it. Let's get to it. Attention, manipulation, the influence continuum. This is a chart or a scale that we're going to be going over near the end of this talk. First, we're going to talk about the categories, or sort of that's probably the best way to put it. The categories of influence and persuasion that are, by the way, built into all of this. All of us. You're going to hear me say over and over again today that these things are inherent in all of us. This is not, let's just go ahead and get to the presentation, and I won't get ahead of myself. I do tend to do that because I want to get to all the good stuff, and there is lots of good stuff here. So actually, first off, let me say, let me first congratulate all of you who are here. Let me see how we're okay. So let me say to you folks out there who are watching this, that you guys are pretty special. In fact, you could even think of yourselves as the elite. Yeah. You're not just curious about the topic of influence. You are someone who goes out of their way to learn the real truths that drive this world. You don't want to be fooled or conned, and you want to know how to avoid it. That kind of puts you right here, right now, in a very exclusive club of people who want to perceive reality clearly and accurately. No joke. If you're watching this, that's probably who you are. And I want to congratulate you for doing that, because not everybody by a long shot wants this information or is even aware that there are things within them that can be utilized or taken advantage of to manipulate and control them. They don't want to acknowledge that fact. They don't want to deal with that. They live in denial. And if you're here today, you probably are not one of those people. So well done. Now, while what I just said is absolutely true, and I do believe it, I also want to let you know that there's a little bit of manipulation going on there, right? So you feel good about yourselves and you feel good about me, right? And, you tell me, did it work? As you'll see, there are all kinds of things that are acting all the time on your psyche to push and pull you in various directions. And here's the thing about this is it is almost all subconscious. These are not things that you think about or have to express in words in your own inner monologue, or really are even always conscious about. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about this. All right, there we go. All right, so fake news. We have a real glut these days of propaganda, fake news, and misinformation. And it's kind of all over the place, whether you're on social media, whether you're watching the news every night, whether you're watching or reading blogs or vlogs or YouTube channels, or however you're getting your information. Lots and lots and lots of podcasts out there. They don't all have filters for bad information and misinformation and fake news. It's just there. It can be said as easily as the truth can be said. So how do we differentiate? That's a really big problem. Because we now live in the internet age, the speed and distance in which thoughts and ideas can spread is staggering. And I personally don't really think as a species that we're actually ready for the technology that we have created. I think it is overwhelming us. And this is why it is so, so important to understand more now than ever before in history why and how we think the way we do and why we act the way we do. This is really crucial. It's no longer an option to really understand ourselves. Now, throughout history, methods of influence, manipulation, and control have been used by leaders of all kinds, from parents to priests to politicians. And like little wind-up dolls, most people respond to these manipulations in one fashion or another. When these forms of control affected a town or a city, it would tend to be a fairly isolated incident. But once mass communications were invented with telegraph and radio and television, and now, of course, the internet, mass influence was suddenly being used everywhere and for everything. Through innuendo, emotional manipulation, and clever use of half-truths, not even lies, just half-truths, people can be fooled into thinking all kinds of nonsensical things, whether it be in the fields of religion, politics, or even science. This all falls under the subject of influence and how we can be influenced, a field of social science which has received a great deal of study in the last few decades. And I'm just going to check in every now and again on the comments and make sure nothing's blowing up. So let's go ahead and discuss this and see if we can't get a better understanding of what this is all about. After all, it's only your mind, And maybe from what you learn, you'll better understand why extremism and cultic belief and authoritarianism seem to be on the rise again globally. We have many, many places in the world right now where this is a real problem. All right, so what is influence? And I'll have to apologize here that my little clip video of me on the screen obscures some of the slides that I put together on this. So what is influence? Any method, technique, event, or language which creates, modifies, or nullifies how you are thinking and acting with the stress on action or behavior. Influence is about changing minds so as to bring about a change in behavior, whether that's getting you to adopt a new idea, purchase a product you may or may not actually need, join or leave a group, or perhaps alter how you feel about a person, a place, or a thing, including, of course, a subject. Now, to begin, let's go ahead and break down these 7 categories or forms of manipulation. Now, this was studied by Dr. Robert Cialdini back in the 1980s for, surprise, marketing purposes, of course. Most social psychology surrounding the study of emotion and emotional behavior and manipulation is marketing research. It's done by psychologists for the purpose of selling you things. That's where a lot of the literature on this exists. And anyway, this has picked up some traction, though, since that time in the social sciences because of its broader applicability. Now, there are 7 categories of influence, and we're going to cover each one of them, but let's just go over them very quickly here. We have reciprocity, we have consistency, commitment, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. All right? Now, let's clarify right from the start that these are not aberrant, ignorant, or bizarre behavior. All of these are perfectly normal things, just like eating, sleeping, and anything else that we all do. There's no gene, There's no brain section that you can remove to get rid of these things. These are built-in features of our instinctive nature. These are, in fact, these 7 things you're looking at here are the building blocks of our social networks, of our individual behavior, and even our morality. No one is exempt from these. No one is immune to them. But that's perfectly fine because we wouldn't be able to survive without our brains automatically responding to these things. They are as natural to us as eating, sleeping, and, well, you know, more intimate things. But just like cults will take normal group behavior and dial it up to 11 and make it crazy, so too can propagandists and predators take these basic instincts and twist them to unduly influence those around them. And that is something that goes on everywhere, all the time. Your kids do it to you and to each other. You do it to your spouse. Your spouse does it right back to you. You use these at work and at play, and it's how we get the things we want in life. But taken too far, these things can create a lot of damage and destruction. So let's take a quick look at each of these. All right. So our first one is reciprocity. Now, game theory, and I don't know if you guys have ever checked into this, but it's kind of complicated. But game theory is very interesting because it tells us that reciprocity, which is otherwise known as tit for tat, right? Exchange back and forth, is the most successful strategy for mutual cooperation in the short and long term. It just works out that being fair, playing on an even playing field is the right way to go for most benefit for most people, most of the time. This has been actually studied in detail and proven. Now, in my own personal estimation, this is just me talking now, I believe that tit for tat as a sort of mental equation is actually the most basic equation that any form of life, all the way down to amoebas, can actually understand. If you hit me, I'm going to feel an almost uncontrollable urge to hit you back. On the other hand, and this is where it gets interesting, if you give me something, I'm also going to feel an almost uncontrollable obligation to give you something back. When these obligations are not met, almost anyone would call that a form of unfairness or even injustice. And this is the principle. This is the instinctive sort of mechanism that so much of our social justice and social values are based on. When these obligations, so this is the basis of much of our thinking, our laws, and our moral foundations. So when it comes to influence, it's very easy to see that if you give someone something, you can create in them an obligation to give or do something back to you. Hare Krishnas and the Moonies, just to talk about cults now, learned how powerful this mechanism was back in the 1970s when they would give out flowers or other trinkets and use that to get people to give them their time or money. And I'm telling you, this stuff works like you wouldn't believe. You might think that's kind of silly, but they still do it to this day because of how successful it is. These organizations, I swear to you, these organizations have made literally billions of dollars using this principle. Now, even if you see it coming, okay, even if you know you don't want to talk to them or give them money, they still know that most of you will stop and listen to them if they can just get a flower or trinket or beads in your hand. And once the cycle starts, they've got their foot in the door, and it's a lot easier to take another step forward and obligate you even further, and even push you into going to an introductory meeting or seminar. For them, it's all a numbers game, and it starts by pushing this very basic button in all of us. All right, let me just check in here and see how we're doing. No, Anthony, I would say sociopaths and psychopaths understand reciprocity amazingly well and utilize it as I just described. That's how I would actually describe that. All right, but like I said, this is not a Q&A, so we will just carry on here. Oh, good. I see more people are showing up. That is awesome. So let's get to our next. So that's reciprocity, okay? Tit for tat, back and forth, exchange. And yes, this is easy for people to take advantage of, especially when people are not paying attention, are distracted, or otherwise in a headspace where they are susceptible to this. And we are all in that place. So then let's take a look at the next category of influence, which is consistency. Yeah, consistency. I did it yesterday, so I'll do it again today. Okay, habits, etc. It's easy for manipulators to take advantage of this because they don't really have to do much manipulating. They know that mental inertia is a thing because people don't want to have to think. It's tiring. It really is. 30% of your body's budget of energy goes to powering your brain and keeping everything regulated through your whole body. When you start really using the gray matter to consider stuff more seriously, you're using more energy and it can become really tiring. This is why absorbing a lot of reading material or video can be so exhausting. It's also why children who have boundless amounts of energy compared to adults are such sponges for information and can intake so much. So for most people, they'll simply go with what they've already figured out or do what they already did rather than change tack. It worked before, so odds are it will work again. And here's the thing. Most of the time, they're right, which is why we evolved to think this way in the first place. It does save a lot of energy and time because nobody can sit there and rethink every calculation, every decision, every, option every single time it's presented to them. We'd be exhausted all the time, having to think and gather information and figure it all out. This is why categorization and why consistency are vital components of our thinking. And we don't have to even really give it a lot of thought. We just do it. So there is another level to this, though. People don't only not want to expend energy thinking, but they don't want to deal with the consequences of thinking. Okay, let me explain. If somebody's going to lose out on an opportunity or fulfill some need that they have, then they don't want to have to think about it. This is one of the bigger issues with trying to talk someone out of joining a bad group or a relationship. If any of you guys have ever tried to do that, here's somebody racing headlong into a bad decision, and you're sitting there going, "Hey, let's talk. Let me show you some facts. Let me show you some reasons maybe why that's not a good idea," and they don't want to hear it. Right? This is actually one of the drivers as to why. Here you are seeing the red flags, but your friend Joe doesn't. He has an emotional or real world problem he's trying to solve. And he thinks that this woman or this new group he's joining are going to be that solution. If you then try to reason him out of it, odds are this will actually cause him to commit to it faster. Why? Because right now they are sure they are right, and they don't want your pesky facts proving them wrong. If they listen to you, they know deep down your facts might change their mind, and they don't want to change their mind. I mean, we've all been here, right? They want their problems solved, or they want their emotional needs filled. They want to keep their solution and not let themselves think about what they've done. The consistency and commitment to it is what is bringing them peace of mind in the form of hope that it will work. And there are very few things that are more powerful in our psyche than hope. So they can then stop thinking about it. Yeah, so people would much rather have hope than have nothing. Any of us who have ever discussed faith with a believer have seen this. And some of you have probably had very teeth-gnashing conversations because of this. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next one, which is commitment. Okay, again, this is all about persuasion and manipulation. How does commitment fit in? We all know what a good thing it is to be committed to our own well-being, to a relationship, a job, a club, or a hobby, or something bigger. It feels great, right? When you really are on and you feel like you're, manifesting a purpose or a goal and you're committed to it, that's a good thing. That feels great. We actually even admire commitment in the face of adversity and look down on quitters or people who couldn't keep their promises. We all do that, don't we? So, of course, a motivation this powerful is something that can be used against us as well. In terms of influence, manipulation of our instinct to commit always starts small. It's the classic frog in the boiling water. But in the sales industry, it's actually called the foot in the door technique. They got a name for this. You get the person to agree to small things, giving just a little bit of agreement to start with. Almost anyone can be reasoned into this, agreeing with innocuous or harmless facts to begin, but slowly building up to stronger and stronger ideas. This is the path to radicalization for anybody, by the way, is this gradual level of commitment. Nobody goes 0 to 100 in one day. It's a gradual thing, and it's getting commitment to stronger and stronger ideas. Getting people to commit in writing by actually having them write down what they're agreeing to, or filling in a sales application or whatever, is actually part of this. We used to use this in Scientology with Sea Org contracts and staff contracts. It was like, sign it, and then we'll burn it up. Okay, sign another one. Okay, let's tear that one up. Okay, sign another one, right? And you just get the person used to signing it, so it takes all the seriousness off of what they're doing. And they find that this commitment isn't ruining their life in the moment, so it must be a good thing. Feels good, right? Yeah, let's keep going. And before you know it, the next day they're on the EPF. The more involved the person is in the process, the more committed they will be to see it through, and the less chance they will back out. Same with making the commitment public, right? You announce it. Now you have social pressures. Now you can't back down because you're a quitter. You'd be a loser. You'd be somebody who doesn't keep your word. Yeah, all kinds of ways that this has little pressures on people. And salespeople and recruiters know all about this and utilize it to great effect. All right, so an important point about commitment is the harder it is to make or keep the commitment, the more committed we will be to it. Okay, so let me explain. This is one reason cults will often create a difficult or even traumatizing event or situation which a person has to go through to be a member. This is why hazing works. You all know about hazing, right? In colleges and sororities and whatnot. People are put through these ritualistic forms of abuse. They do this in the military, in the Navy. They have the that thing when you cross the equator, the shellback initiation or ceremony. There are all kinds of levels of hazing and initiation rites that people willingly accede to and go through. And this commitment point is why. If you have to endure something hard to become a member, your membership means more to you. And it's easier to incorporate it into your identity because of that struggle. And this applies socially as well. Which branches of the military do we admire and respect the most? I'd say it's the ones where the price of entry is not just boot camp, but weeks of hellish special forces training, as you see in the picture there. These ordeals are not just abuse for its own sake. They create loyalty like nothing else can. And you can forget ever getting rid of these practices. Every attempt to ban them ends in dismal failure. They either go underground or they go hidden, or people will say they comply, but then they really don't. They do something else. Or the groups actually just fall apart because of the lack of commitment, because people are not as committed to them, because they don't go through that ritualistic abuse. It is bizarro Black Mirror world to think that that's actually a thing, but it really is. It really is. All right, let me just check in here, see how we're doing. Yes, exactly. Good. All right, you guys are keeping up. Excellent. Now let's go to one of my favorite ones. This one is big. Social proof. Okay. Social proof. One means we use to determine what is correct is to find out what other people think is correct. If other people are doing it, it must be right. This is instinctive. We don't have to think about this. It's not just peer pressure. It's literally, if you're walking down the street and a bunch of people are doing something, you're going to probably start doing it too. And conversely, if you see a bunch of people not doing something or avoiding something, you'll probably not do it or avoid it as well. Social proof is basically, it's like this. The more people who say something, the more likely we think it's probably true. Social proof is basically a kind of herd mentality for humans. There was a motivational consultant named Cavett Roberts who said, quote, since 95% of the people are imitators and only 5% initiators, people are persuaded more by the actions of others than by any proof we can offer. All right, now you see here a bunch of people running away from something as a group, right? This is how we survived as a species. Since if we see a bunch of people running from something, we'll immediately feel the urge to start running too. And probably will, thus saving ourselves from whatever disaster is about to befall. I mean, this has obvious evolutionary reasoning as to why we would behave this way. And humans, of course, are not the only animal form or life form that engages in this kind of social proof behavior. So, at the same time, this lemming effect, we could say, can also work against us, since this is the mechanism that drives tribal behavior. If you're committed to a group cause, all it takes is for someone to demonstrate that they're not part of your group for you to immediately start thinking less of that person. We all say we wouldn't, but we kind of do. On the other hand, if someone shows you they are part of your group and are going along with what your group is doing, you automatically think better of that person. It's an automatic response, and it doesn't even necessarily conform with what you really think or believe, like I show here in this cartoon, right? Here's a bunch of people who know this isn't a good idea, but they're all doing it anyway. This can lead to some pretty goofy behavior, since that kind of us versus them group think means you can so easily be influenced to not just think negatively, but actually hate those who are not going along with what your group is doing or what they represent themselves as doing when we get into the mode of cults or deceitful groups, right? They say they're doing one thing, they're actually doing something else. And Scientology, of course, is a killer example of that exact kind of thing. Okay. Now, obviously, then, this can be used to control you as well. Easily. In fact, I'd say this is one of the easiest mechanisms of control there are. Social proof is amazingly powerful. If someone comes along claiming to be part of your group or claiming to be for your cause but is lying, they gain the benefit of your allyship and your automatic goodwill towards them. which they can then use to get their foot in the door and start working you over in other ways. Remember that commitment point, little gradual agreements, step by step, bit by bit. We see this here is illustrated here. We see this in the self-help and mindfulness and wellness industry all the time, where opportunists who are literally just there to make a profit will align their marketing materials to appear to be something quite different from what they really are. I mean, again, Scientology to a T, every single one of these groups to a T. They'll adopt the language and customs of professional medical practitioners. They will use symbols and icons from real medicine, and yet what they're actually doing and selling has nothing to do with that. Or take a look at a Deepak Chopra. Remember this guy? His whole shtick is pretending to align supernatural mumbo jumbo with words and principles taken out of quantum physics that have nothing to do with quantum physics. Now, this con artist and these kinds of con artists rely heavily on the social proof principle to sell themselves as something that they are not. And this also appears in subtly deceptive ways, like when you walk into a restaurant or a bar or even a church, and there's already money in the tip or donation jar. They call it salting the jar, right? They put a little money, a little seed money in there before anybody shows up, right? Why would they do that? Well, because if other people have been tipping, you'll notice that and you'll feel an urge that you should tip too. Now, maybe you ignore it, but you feel it. We used to set up ringers in Scientology fundraisers who'd already agreed to make a donation, but made it appear in the middle of the fundraiser rally that it was spontaneous. I feel all of a sudden like I need to give you $10,000, right? And of course, we had worked that person over for days, but then we said, hey, don't tell anybody, right? Let's announce it in the middle of the fundraiser and make it look like it's a spontaneous thing, and that'll get everybody else to do it. We literally, that's exactly the words we would use in talking to the person about it, and they would always agree to do it. This is a legendary tactic with all prosperity gospel preachers and salespeople. Why do you think a bestseller, as I'm showing here, is something marketers always want to advertise? They're telling you everyone else is buying this thing, so obviously you should buy it too. There's even more, this is even more pronounced when we look at research that shows people will tend to follow the leader or be influenced by others' behavior when that leader or those people that they're following actually physically or culturally resemble them, right? Like for like. The more closely we can see someone is in our tribe, quote unquote, the more readily we will imitate or follow their behavior. That's a fact. That's, you know, the funny thing about this is I'm sure I am talking to you guys about some of these principles already. And some of you are thinking as you're watching this, well, sure, but that's not me. Oh, I don't do that. No, I wouldn't do that. You know, everyone thinks that. Everyone. You are in vast company in thinking you're the exception to these rules. And I'm sorry to tell you that studies show most of you are not. Right? This is just how there's a difference between how we think we behave and how we really behave. And this talk today is about the reality of our behavior, not the nice ideas that we kind of have in our heads. And this will get even worse as we go. So like I said, I'm gonna kind of harp on this stuff. Okay, so social proof, right? This explains the phenomenon of things going viral. That's just the latest term to describe human herd mentality and how overwhelmingly influential it can be on our individual opinions and values. We often criticize the masses, but we also instinctively want to follow them. And it's a real struggle on an individual level to be able to resist that pull. Real hard. But now let's talk about something where social proof actually gets a little bit scary. Have any of you ever heard of the Werther effect? Now, I mentioned this last week on my Friday show, so if you were there for my Friday show, you might have heard me talk about this. Just kind of dropped it as a piece of information, but this is where it fits. It is a piece of social proof. Here is how it is discussed. I actually just pulled this straight from the Wikipedia page on it. A spike of emulation suicides after a widely publicized suicide is known as the Werther effect. This is also known as copycat suicide, and it is a well-documented, understood phenomenon. This is not some rando opinion or some idea somebody has. They've actually studied this and proven it over and over again. I threw a couple graphs on the screen there to show you some of the statistics that have been used in studying this. The publicized, and here's the thing, and it follows a publicized suicide. It has to be known. It has to be broadcast. It's not just the fact that somebody did that. It's the publication of it and the mass media effect of it that is the Werther effect. The publicized suicide serves as a trigger in the absence of protective factors for the next suicide by a susceptible or suggestible person. This is referred to as suicide contagion. This is the exact reason, by the way, that you now see hotline numbers and links to websites about suicide prevention in almost every media report about suicides. And that fact of putting those numbers and links in the articles actually reduces this Werther effect. Sometimes this kind of behavior will spread through a school system, through a community, or in terms of a celebrity suicide wave, it'll happen at a national level. This is called a suicide cluster. Social proof is one of the most powerful forces propagandists attempt to utilize in doing their work. They can use it for good or bad. This doesn't have a value all by itself. Werther effect, obviously, is not something we want, but this business of social contagion and social proof can be utilized for good things as well as bad things. Otherwise, it wouldn't be part of our psyche and our makeup. The instincts within us to follow the herd don't differentiate much when it comes to consequences or outcomes. It's up to us to use our rationality to pay close attention to where groupthink is going and resist the urge to let it take us along for the ride. Okay? All right, just check in here, see how we are doing. Yes. Okay, great. You guys are awesome. All right, let's go to the next point, which is liking. Okay, and I cut off that little bit there, but this one person says, I love reading, and the other person says, so do I, let's work together. And this is, of course, liking. When you like someone, the odds are that person can influence or manipulate you much easier than a stranger. We can call this bias or even prejudicial favoritism, but the fact is that if we didn't experience a kind of liking or affinity for one another, we'd devolve into social anarchy very quickly, and things would be kind of awful everywhere, right? So, however, like everything else, predators and salespeople can use this to their advantage. We saw this years ago in at-home sales events, like on the top picture there, Tupperware parties. Remember those? And now we see it exploited to the tune of billions of dollars a year through multi-level marketing schemes like Amway and Herbalife, which is in the bottom picture there. There's also that common bit you hear from salespeople after you've purchased something, where they ask you if you have any friends or family who'd also be interested in this product. Would anybody else benefit from this, right? You just got sold on it. So, oh yeah, my Aunt Jemima and my Uncle Larry and, all these people, right? And of course, when the salespeople contact those family members or friends of yours, they name drop you. And that's how they help get their foot in the door, because they don't know this sales guy, but they know you. And that factor of liking is a way for the salesperson to use that to his advantage, or cult recruiter for that matter. Now, here's the awfulness of this is that, and the shallowness of it, is that attractiveness is actually a key factor here. It just is. And this has been proven again and again and again and again. Tom Cruise, for example. People often know his Scientology connections. I have gone online so many times on Reddit, on Twitter, on Facebook. I've had conversations with people about Tom Cruise and who he really is and what he's really about. And people, for the most part, in my experience, people actually already know. They do. They saw him jump around on Oprah's couch. They know he's disconnected from his daughter. They know he shuns her. They know all the lunatic stuff. But despite that, they still pay money and love his work. Why? What is it with this guy? Well, he's attractive. So much so that memes have been created about it. And looks are everything, no matter who tells you otherwise. Since research shows we will automatically assume, and this is true, we will automatically assume that good-looking people are honest, intelligent, talented, and kind. Someone has to prove otherwise for us to change our minds, whereas unattractive people don't get any such benefit of the doubt. Individually, we may say we don't agree with that, but our behavior says otherwise, and this has really unfortunate consequences outside of the entertainment industry, such as in sports, in job hirings, and in the legal arena. One study found that attractive defendants in court were twice as likely to avoid jail as unattractive ones. And this was equally true of male and female jury members and judges. The bias is intrinsic in us, and we really have to be aware of it and fight back against it in order for it not to have some influence on us. This is literally influence we do to ourselves. Yeah. Okay. Now, related to this, introducing competition in any form, whether educational, sports, or in one's professional life, will automatically create us versus them tribalism. Even when groups are arbitrarily and randomly created between boys in a summer camp, let's say, the mere fact of separating them creates teams which immediately begin vying for superiority. When flags, symbols, mottos, and other identity-creating devices are introduced, this can rile the groups up to start being not just competitive, but actually violent. These are points of study, of research. It's only when both groups are forced by circumstances to work together do we see the competition factor eliminated, with cooperation and good feeling resulting, because there's a mutual overcoming of a similar or same obstacle. And that's the only solution to the problem of us versus them, of the tribalism, is a common goal that everybody can work towards, and preferably one where it is mandated, it's required that they have to cooperate in order to overcome the goal. It can't just be one or two people can take on the burden of doing everything and everybody else just gets to sit down and watch. That kind of thing isn't going to resolve anything. But if you get people working together, man, it's hard to then it's hard to create division. And this is actually, unfortunately, precisely why war is so good for unifying populations. A common enemy brings everyone together. This has a great deal to do with the subconscious feelings we have about liking or disliking someone or something. If they're somehow competitive to us, we don't like them as much. We just don't. It's that simple. So if somebody also, of course, can create competition or can create jealousy or inequality or inequity or ideas of injustice, if they can create those ideas in us, they can rile us up to actually violent ends very quickly, because it preys on not just one of these, but many of these principles. Then there is association, where we lump our feelings about a product in with our feelings about the good looks of the model who's displaying that product. You wouldn't think we should all be so shallow, but we really are. And it's not just attractive models, but also cultural touchstones or popular points. And I'm just going to say right now, and I'm not bringing this up as a bone of contention or to try to say, one side or the other is good or bad. I'm just bringing this up as a point of this kind of association. Is that we can see right now a current furor, a big problem in the United States right now, is advertising that endorses LGBT values. This is huge right now. It's blowing up all over social media. We can see society lining up behind these ideologically and not just boycotting, but actively hoarding or destroying these products merely because of the associations the products are bringing to mind. Now, Bud Light, for example, and I don't know if you guys know about this, but if you don't, go check it out. Bud Light did not change anything about what's in the can. But because of their marketing campaign, they have people, their stocks are crashing right now, and people are literally making TikTok videos about blowing up cases of Bud Light. It is the most ludicrous behavior I've ever seen. But this is that association influence at work. And liking or disliking something is a powerful, powerful motivator that can drive people's behavior, and that can even drive it right over a cliff. All right, and then don't even get me started on how successful it is to bring food into the picture of influence. Look at any successful fundraisers, political lobbyists, or even some salespeople, and how much they love doing business over a meal or serving food to get people to show up. Oh, this was classic in Scientology. We knew if you didn't have food at the fundraiser or at the IAS briefing or at the fundraising building thing or whatever, if you didn't have food, you could forget it. You were not going to make anywhere near as much money as if you provided snacks or even a meal. It's literally Pavlovian. And there's plenty of research to back that up. All right. So that is liking. Okay. Very, very powerful motivator. All right. So now, of course, we have authority. Okay. Let me just take a look here. Yes. Oh, hey, Alex. See you in the comments here. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So moving right along to authority. Let me just wet my whistle here. All right. How we doing? Oh, wow. All right. Doing pretty good. A lot of the investment that we make in our ideas or our beliefs come from where we got them in the first place. Most of us can remember all the way back to our childhood who our authority figures were, meaning who we listened to and trusted. Maybe they were experts on the subject matter, and maybe they were just our parents. But we listened and we believed. And we still do. Authority is one of the most powerful motivators there is. And this is not just an opinion, but a replicated conclusion of countless social science experiments, most famously those known as the Milgram experiment. What Milgram did at Yale University, first back in the 1960s, was measure the willingness of participants. And the original one I'm going to describe to you here. 40 men in the age range of 20 to 50 years old from a diverse range of occupations with varying levels of education. They were measuring the willingness of those men to obey an authority figure who instructed them to perform acts conflicting with their personal conscience. Participants were led to believe that they were assisting a doctor or a scientist in a different experiment. They were the subject of the experiment, but they didn't know that. They thought they were the helpers, and they were having to administer electric shocks to a quote-unquote learner, okay? And in the diagram there, you can see the doctor is in the top right corner, and the actual subject of the experiment, who is inflicting the shocks or thinks that's what he's doing, is in the bottom middle, and there's a wall. And on the other side of the wall is a person, and that person is supposedly connected up to this electric shock machine. They weren't really. And there was a speaker system so that the person pressing the buttons, could hear them. And the doctor sat behind them or stood over them and told them to keep administering these shocks on this learner. And the learner was supposed to repeat back phrases and memorize them. And if they didn't, they'd get a shock. And the voltage on the shocks increased gradually. Okay. Yeah, and had they been real, by the way, the levels of shock delivered to these learners, to these subjects, would have actually been fatal. The experiment found, unexpectedly, nobody expected this, they found that a very high proportion of subjects would fully obey the instructions, with every single participant going up to 300 volts. Now, again, they weren't really shocking the guy. They thought they were. And they could hear the effects of this. And 65% of these initial 40 men went all the way up to 450 volts. Now, while originally done with men, this experiment has been replicated all over the world. This is not just college students. This is not just men. This is not just of people of a certain age group or a profession or education. Between 65 to 90% of test subjects, male and female, all ages, all education levels, all professions, cultures, were completely willing to deliver electric shocks to another human being when told to do so. If you describe this experiment to people, they will uniformly tell you that they and no one else would do that. But the reality is that context is everything. And the average human being put into a scenario where an authority figure is ordering them to do something, even harmful to another, they'll do it. We all think we wouldn't, and we'd argue vigorously that we wouldn't, but research proves otherwise. Now, to be clear, okay, it's not that these people who were pressing these buttons thinking they were shocking somebody, it's not that they didn't protest. They didn't just sit there like little automatons. They protested. They made efforts to stop. They said, I don't want to do this. But when the authority figure told them what to do, they continued doing it despite hearing the suffering of their victim. As one of the researchers said, quote, I observed a mature and initially poised businessman enter the laboratory smiling and confident. Within 20 minutes, he was reduced to a twitching, stuttering wreck who was rapidly approaching a point of nervous collapse. He constantly pulled on his earlobe and twisted his hands. At one point, he pushed his fist into his forehead and muttered, "Oh God, let's stop it." And yet, he continued to respond to every word of the experimenter and obeyed to the end. Now, these are not evil, psychotic people. They were just like you and me. They were put into a situation, though, that they felt powerless to stop or do anything about, and so they just continued following orders. This exact same phenomenon is detailed by Christopher Browning in a book called Ordinary Men, which I really can't recommend enough. It is grisly reading. But it is a book about how police officers in Germany were utilized during World War II to eliminate hundreds of thousands of minorities across Germany and Poland in carrying out Hitler's final solution. These were policemen, not military personnel. People whose job it was to protect citizens and enforce laws. Yet hardly any of them refused their orders, even when it was made pretty clear that the officers in charge were not going to persecute them or kill them for refusing. It wasn't a threat of death that got those police officers to murder, hundreds of thousands of people. And it took months to do that. These were people who just dedicated themselves to this cause. This is the authority figure at work. This is how powerful this is. It's terrifying how powerful this is. As Milgram himself put it, it is the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority that constitutes the chief finding of the study. Now, authority is conferred, moving on, maybe a little brighter topic here, but authority is conferred in simple but powerful ways. There's titles and credentials, there's clothing and appearance, and there's vehicles, and there's jewelry, and there's all these things that we see or hear or even smell that tell us somebody is an authority figure, is somebody who's in charge, is somebody who knows what they're doing. Time and again, research shows that people will persistently underestimate the rates of compliance or influence that these things have, both in their own behavior and that of others. This common but all too flawed self-assurance that people have that they would act more rationally and reasonably than they really do is one of the bedrocks that con artists use to fool people. It's so much easier to fool someone who is absolutely sure that they can't be fooled than it is to fool someone who has a more honest assessment of their own limitations. And that's why imparting this information to you is so important to me, because I want to empower you with this information. And it might seem in the way I'm talking about this or in the data itself that we're powerless, that we have no way of fighting back against this, that this is just what we do. No, this is what we do when we don't know any better. That's a very important point, okay? So that's why, again, you guys are the special people for being here in the first place. All right, let's go ahead and get on to the next aspect of this. And let me just, again, just take a quick look here and make sure all is well. Looks like it is. All right, let's carry on with our presentation here. Scarcity. All right, this has been another big one. When something is considered scarce or it's about to be gone, it suddenly becomes more valuable in our eyes. People will go out of their way to express interest in something that's vanishing, even if they never once in their entire life had ever been interested in it before. You tell somebody something's going away, it's exclusive, it's not available, it is somehow out of reach or is going to be out of reach, and they'll practically kill for it. It's really something. This principle has everything to do, by the way, with the current trend of what's called FOMO, fear of missing out. You guys might have heard of this. In fact, research indicates people seem to be more motivated by the thought of losing something than by the thought of gaining something of equal value. If you want to sell, check this out, if you want to sell someone insulation for their home, push how much they'll lose by not having it rather than how much money they'll save. Yeah. That slight difference has huge consequences on sales success. The same applies to our health. We will act if we feel we have something to lose far more often than if we think we're going to get some benefit from it. I know, right? And of course, everyone has heard of the limited time offer or buy now before it's too late. Yet we still respond like little robots to it. As one sales manager said, quote, "Keep the prospects from taking the time to think the deal over by scaring them into believing they can't have it later, which makes them want it now." Why? Because normally speaking, it is true that when something is scarce or difficult to get, it's more valuable. That's a mental calculus we can all make, and most of the time we're right. And manipulators know that. The other reason has to do with choices, and even our concept of freedom and free will. If we can no longer exercise the freedom to purchase, join, or otherwise get something, we will feel we are missing out on our future opportunities to make those choices. So we feel compelled to act now to prevent that future loss. But, and this is interesting, it's not just the obvious buy now advertising that the scarcity principle applies to. It's rampant in politics and culture wars, where one of the primary buttons being pushed is our freedom to do what we want, when we want, where we want, and with who we want. Whether we're pushing back against cultural norms, established laws, or government regulations, the basis of the emotions are almost always that we feel our freedoms being threatened, and we must fight back before they're gone or taken away. If you think about this, you'll see how what I'm talking about right now applies equally on the left and the right in terms of how they perceive the issues that are important to them. We're all human, and we all share the same influential weaknesses, which are then easily exploited by politicians and predators on both sides of any ideological equation you care to look at. It's a real influencer. Now, studies have also shown conclusively that banning something, and this might be controversial for some of you, but I'm going to go ahead anyway. Banning something, whether it's guns or books or information or anything, always results in a majority of people wanting those things even harder and willing to pay more for them. I know, it's crazy. It's always a huge surprise to me, though, how little that gun control advocates actually understand the psychology of influence. Because every single time the idea of banning guns starts being discussed in the media, gun sales consistently skyrocket. I've seen this over and over again. I'm sure you have too. So in their own misguided way, gun control advocates who push for gun bans, not regulations, not laws, not sensible common sense stuff. Don't get me wrong here and think that I'm saying, you know, hey, let's have all the guns we want. I'm talking about the psychology of banning things here. Okay? If you are pushing to ban guns, you're acting to actually increase the number of guns in circulation and how valuable they are. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. Book bans, on the other hand, I'm 100% in support of book bans for the same reason. For the same reason. You want to make something more popular, you want to get it out there in more people's hands, try to ban it. This is the number one reason, by the way, the number one reason why I have said for years that banning Scientology, banning a destructive cult is never going to work. Our own psychology will undo it. They already tried it in Australia in the 1960s. It didn't work then. It wouldn't work now. Just saying. Okay? This principle is crucial to understand because it's also used purposefully by bad actors and misinformation specialists. Cancel culture is another name for the organic pushback by groups of people to ideas they do not like, and they seek to drive those ideas out of existence. The irony is that doing so only guarantees those ideas will continue to take root. In fact, studies show those who are canceled, whether it's people or ideas, actually become more acceptable. So some who realize this will continually talk about how they are being canceled or banned or censored. Because the mere fact of that, regardless of who they are or what their ideas are, that will cause people to be more sympathetic to them and their cause. It's another manifestation of the scarcity principle at work. All right. And finally, this is why sacred lore or secret knowledge is such a huge draw for destructive cults, okay? And a lot of you guys have asked over the years about Xenu and how people can possibly fall for this. How can they believe it? How could they possibly think that this is a thing? But the fact of the matter is that secret knowledge or secret lore draws people in like almost nothing else can. Just the hint that there is secret knowledge will attract attention and can sometimes all by itself draw a person in further than they may realize. In sales, being let in on a secret about the product or its availability has boosted sales figures by 6 times. It will also make a person feel compelled to work harder, pay more, or somehow sacrifice things of value so that they can attain that secret knowledge. They will also, get this, they will also tend to be more committed to believing in that lore if it was hard to get and it's secret in the first place, right? Because that scarcity principle comes into play here too, and these other principles, right? This is, I'm afraid, one of the big reasons Scientology and other groups with secret lore can retain their members longer than most people can understand. Why would anyone put up with the kind of abuses that Scientologists put up with? The scarcity principle is one of the reasons, and it's an important one to understand so you don't get fooled by it. All right, so those are our 7 categories, and there are some conclusions we can draw from this that I'd like to share with you. Okay, let me just... again, check in with you guys here. Yes, I need to know. Exactly. Mystery sandwich. That's how Hubbard put it. It's exactly right, Xion. So here are some conclusions here, okay? Behavior, our human behavior, is far more push button than people think or want to believe. Many of our choices are tied directly to our fight, flight, freeze, fawn instincts. Okay, you've all heard of that fight or flight thing. It's actually fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so many of the things I've discussed here today are anchored directly to that. Now, not knowing this, most people don't know this. And not knowing this, people will usually assign the wrong reasons. They'll even invent reasons why they're doing what they're doing. And those reasons will be informed by their own biases, their beliefs, their education, and their social network, right? Those are the things that tell us whether we're good or bad or right or wrong, whether our values matter or are good or not, is what are other people telling us? How are other people acting? That whole social proof concept is big at play here, okay? So there are the real reasons people do things. And then there's the reasons people tell themselves that they're doing things. And often, these are 2 separate things. Most of the things that influence people subconsciously are far more beneficial than destructive to ourselves and to society, which is why evolutionarily they tend to make sense for us to react or think the way we do. Okay, again, most of this stuff is good most of the time. However, predators and opportunists are the outliers who utilize these facts to unduly manipulate people for their own personal or professional gain. Because these methods of influence rely on instinctive or habitual human behavior, there is no way to always be aware of when these things are being used against you, especially when used by master manipulators or human predators. So a disciplined and reflexive approach, kind of like pay attention to the inside of what's going on with you. Pay attention to your, emotional state, things like this. A disciplined and reflexive approach to how we make decisions in our life is the only possible antidote. which requires not just knowing basic principles of critical thinking, but also understanding our own emotional needs and triggers. Since none of that comes organically, education is the only possible route. All right? So those were my conclusions from all of this, at least, that I thought I should share. Now, there is a little bit more to go over with you here, though, because now we're going to talk about the influence continuum. All right, and I threw a quote up there on the screen. That is actually a quote from a survivor of the People's Temple. She got out before they went down to Guyana and drank all the Flavor Aid. Her name was Jeannie Mills, and she said, "When you meet the friendliest people you have ever known, who introduce you to the most loving group of people you've ever encountered, and you find the leader to be the most inspired, caring, and compassionate and understanding person you've ever met, and then you learn that the cause of the group is something you never dared hope could be accomplished, and all of this sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Don't give up your education, your hopes, and ambitions to follow a rainbow." All right? That is just such vital advice. So, how is influence on a spectrum of some to more to too much? Well, given how many forces are at work to influence us, how can we navigate our lives with any security or feeling that we aren't just driftwood being tossed about on oceans of misinformation and manipulation? Well, there's a scale or continuum of influence which we should all be familiar with, because not all influence is bad. Parents, teachers, managers, and even entertainers can all have positive and lasting influence on us. Not every form of manipulation is inherently evil, as any parent who has ever had to deal with an unruly child can tell you. And while some argue that education itself can be a form of manipulation, I'd say it's awfully hard to negatively impact a person's life by giving them more information about almost anything. It's how that information is used that determines its value. On the other hand, we also have very real concerns about individuals or groups which utilize deceptive methods or undue influence to bind their victims into behavior which is morally reprehensible, illegal, or even violent. Yet such people or groups can appear to be the exact opposite of that. So, how do loving, well-intentioned people who are just trying to help themselves, their families, and even all of society, how can these people become transformed into homicidal or suicidal versions of themselves? These are not closet sociopaths or psychopaths or genetically deficient morons. They represent a cross-section of every level and part of any society anywhere. There is no one who is immune to influence, and there is no one who cannot be lied to. So the hard truth is, anyone is susceptible to coercive or cultic control. All right. Now, again, I'm kind of taking over a little bit of that there, but along the edge there, you can see the top row: education, advertising, propaganda, indoctrination, and thought reform. That is our influence continuum. We can map influence on a spectrum from less to more. In fact, cult researchers, Dr. Margaret Singer and Janja Lalich, did so with their continuum of influence and persuasion, which you can see part of on the screen there. As we move from left to right, the degree of influence gradually increases until on the extreme end, on the far right, not politically, I mean on the far right of the screen there, we can see thought reform, where the target of the influence is no longer really in control of the situation, even if they have been led to believe they are. This level of extreme manipulation has also been called brainwashing or coercive persuasion. Some cult apologists and academics out there would have you believe that this is not validated science and it's just anti-cult propaganda, But these are terms that have been utilized and diagnosed in psychiatry's DSM since the 1980s and is widely recognized in lots and lots of medical texts. This continuum starts on the left with education and advertising, which are relatively benign forms of imparting information. Advertising is where this starts becoming one-sided, with the person simply receiving the data but unable to meaningfully respond to it. For over a century, advertisers have used and honed various methods to most favorably appeal to the broadest number of people. And while everyone honestly believes advertising doesn't work on them, statistics over decades of research prove otherwise. Now, propaganda, which is our next step, the third column there, tends to focus on political messaging or persuasion of masses. You can't exert the same level of physical or psychological control over a large body of people the same way you would go about controlling an individual, and this is where propaganda comes in. It's the influence of the masses. Now, indoctrination, next column over, is an effort to instill group or organizational values, almost always as senior to those of the individual or the minority. Resistance is not appreciated and usually punished, but this still, when we're in the indoctrination section here, it's still voluntary in nature, and the punishments are usually understood and agreed upon beforehand, like at your job or in a club, where you're going to have rules and guidelines that you're expected to follow, and you get indoctrinated into what those are, and it's kind of, this is how it is, and you need to go along with it, and most of us do, because that's the price of membership. Indoctrination is not trying to be deceptive, but it is a method of control. Now, when we're dealing with thought reform, when we get all the way over to the end, we're talking about attempts to control by destabilizing an individual's sense of self, of their moral foundations, and other personal values that they have through emotional and informational manipulation. It doesn't require physically beating a person to get them to change their mind about something. In fact, physical torture is one of the least effective means of thought reform, because as soon as the person is no longer on the rack or being waterboarded, they have no reason to continue saying or believing what their torturer wants, and they very quickly let go of those ideas since they are associated with nothing but pain and anguish. Expert thought reform, the really long-lasting, powerful stuff, is done by associating feelings of incredible euphoria, bliss, or happiness with certain ideas or beliefs. Once that's accomplished, and especially if the person has identified with the source, you practically own that person, because they will say or do whatever you want to get that bliss back. This is the heart of Scientology with auditing. That auditing process is powerful stuff. And the more you get, the more addicted to it you get, the more you want it, the more you'll pay for it, and the more you will jump through all levels of loyalty hoops to stay part of the group and toe the line so that you can get more of that. There are other experiences that people have in Scientology, group experiences and things like that, which, groups like Landmark Forum or EST or, large group awareness trainings are very aware of. You can get that whole group bliss euphoria thing going. Very powerful, very, very powerful stuff. The most effective forms of thought reform are the ones where a person cooperates every step of the way. And sometimes, like in certain cults or relationships, a person will actually fight against anyone who tries to get in the way. How is this done? Subtly, gradually, and by telling the person enough of what they want to hear, or by giving them enough of what they believe they want to move them from one step to the next. Remember, it's getting your foot in the door. One step, next step, next step. Scientology, for example, In there, this usually starts by finding a person's ruin. The big problem or issue they carry around that they think is ruining their life. This is right in the beginning. Whether it's a communication, a relationship, study, or time issue, almost everyone has some kind of problem they can't really solve, which negatively impacts their life. A Scientology recruiter can skillfully get a person to open up about this, sympathize with the person, and then offer them a service which will cure or solve that problem forever. At the lowest levels of almost any cult, these beginning services or activities are usually focused around some common sense principle, but they're presented in such a way that it looks like it's hidden or secret knowledge. Right? You can only get it here. It's exclusive to us. Remember all those principles we've been going over about manipulation and influence. The more sure a person is they are receiving exclusive wisdom, which can only be attained in this group, the easier it is to keep them there to get more. What other secrets do they have to tell me? As the cost of these gradually increases, so too does the person's commitment because of the scarcity principle we also discussed earlier. Often, this received wisdom causes the victim, or the mark, if you will, to reinterpret their own life history and radically alter their worldview to align with this new information, gradually shifting their moral values and their interpretations of reality. Okay? Here we go. So let's come back to us and the chat here. And let me just check in here before I really start wrapping this up. Hey, Chad's on board. Excellent. All right, let's just see here. Good, good, good. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and see about wrapping up here. I had a few points that I thought I might impart as far as how to avoid undue influence. How do we, we can't help but fall prey to these principles. These are the makeup of our psyche. But how do we do better? How do we avoid temptation? How do we avoid falling for traps and manipulations? Okay, there are just a couple principles here I'm going to ask you or go over with you that'll help. And trust me, if you use this stuff, it actually will help. Okay, the first thing is give yourself time. Okay, I've said this before. I've said this a million times. It really bears repeating over and over again that when you are faced with an important decision, an expensive decision, a costly decision, a decision that's going to have consequences for you or for others, give yourself the time to actually make it in a non-emotional way, in an objective way, in a rational way. Okay, using the frontal lobes. And if you are in a fight, flight, fawn, freeze mode, you are not acting or thinking objectively or rationally. You're thinking emotionally. You're thinking impulsively, instinctively. And that's not always right when it comes to major decisions in your life, not in our complicated world. Maybe in the jungle, when the lion was jumping and you needed to make an immediate decision to jump left or right, and and you would just do it. And sometimes you were right and sometimes you weren't, right? That's okay in those kind of situations, life, death, whatever. That's why we have these instincts. But when it comes to buying a new car or a house or joining a cult or, getting into a relationship with somebody or getting married or breaking up, it's coming or going. It's leaving or joining. Give yourself the time. Take a day. Take 2. Take 3. You know how your own moods work. If you don't, pay more attention to them because you'll find that they change a lot. Very, very, very few people I've ever met are constantly monotone in their emotional state, right? We go up and down all the time, and depending on our current state, everything depends on that as far as our emotional processing and our rationality. Really can't be stressed enough. All right. And if you give yourself the time, your emotions will pass and new emotions will come along and you'll go up and down and back and forth and just let that process play out. no matter what you're being told, to pressure you to do it now. Remember that quote I read earlier from one of those sales guys? They know what they're doing when they're manipulating you, and they're doing it on purpose. It's not an accident. No matter how much you like this guy, and your liking of the salesperson will have everything to do with whether you believe him or not, or whether you even are suspicious of the person or not. You should be suspicious if somebody's trying to sell you something or get you to do something that you wouldn't normally buy or do. Okay, so that's the first point. Second point, and this is an important one too. Don't just be willing to ask challenging questions, actually do so. Take the time to form the questions in your mind that challenge any assertion or idea or sales pitch. For example, if you believe someone's an authority figure, ask yourself why you believe that. Is this person really an authority, and are they actually speaking on the subject on which they are an expert? And if they are a real expert, why are they asking us to believe them? Is there some personal motivation, or are they offering an unbiased take? And that's just one example. Actually form the questions in your mind. It's the process of doing that that engages your frontal lobes and your critical thinking and tones down the emotional element. So it's not just enough to walk around going, I am willing to ask questions, I'm willing to take a stand. Actually do it. Even if you don't ask the questions out loud, just the process of forming them is often enough to kickstart the rest of the brain into going, oh, hey, wait a minute. Okay, and finally, the last bit of advice I have for you here is understand your own emotional triggers and buttons. And I mentioned that before, right? What is it that makes you happy? What sets you off? What are your triggers? Can you develop a kind of self-discipline to be aware of your emotional state and recognize when you're most vulnerable? And can you do that before you get burned? That's the key question, and it's worth your time. I can't stress enough today, now, when I was a young man, I was pressured by my parents and by every single social contact I had that mattered to me to make decisions that affected the rest of my life all the way to today. The decisions that I was pressured to make were bad decisions. Join Scientology, join staff, work for them, join the Sea organization. These were all group pressure decisions. Even the Sea Org component was, there was group pressure there. I'd been recruited many, many times. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know how to fight back. I didn't even know I could or should. It didn't even occur to me to fight back, to question, to wonder. Never even entered my mind. I lost 27 years of my life to that I'm never going to get back. I would spare you that pain with these principles. If I had known this stuff, if I had understood this stuff, if I had thought, I need to give myself time, I need to step back from this, I need to question why these people are authority figures, I need to understand myself a little bit better in this situation. If any of those had been present at that time, my life could have been incredibly different and probably significantly more constructive. So that's where all this comes from for me and what my motivation is here in doing this today. So I want to thank all of you for coming along and watching me talk about this. I hope that this information that I've imparted here is useful, helpful, and I hope I presented it in a somewhat entertaining fashion for you today. That is always the goal here. And with all of that, I guess, well, thank you, Liz. That is absolutely, I agree. It was hard to overcome. But having done so, like I said, I would spare others that same level of nonsense in their life. So I want to kind of reiterate for everybody, because I really don't promote this enough. I have a Patreon. You can support this channel through YouTube memberships. There's a join button right there below this video. You can use PayPal, whatever, to show some love in my direction. And also, all of this and more is the kind of stuff that I go over and talk about with people when I am doing consulting with them. And if you are somebody who could use some advice, guidance, or direction in your life, I do not offer counseling or therapy. That is not the kind of psychology that I do, but I do offer guidance and advice and education in the direction of helping people recover from a cult experience or a coercive situation. And you can contact me to do that. All right. So that all being said, this has been a very fun live stream to do with you guys. I very, very much appreciate your viewership. And with that, I guess we will go ahead and wrap up for today. I will see you guys tomorrow night right here at 6 o'clock Mountain Time for Critical Conversations. Bye-bye.